A Ge'ez manuscript sits inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. It has not left that building in living memory. Clergy guard the entrance. Non-initiates are turned back at the door. Inside its pages, in a text copied from scrolls more than 2,000 years old, the angel Raphael leads a man through 4 hollow chambers carved deep beneath a mountain. What happens to your body at death, the text says, determines which chamber receives your soul. Banned, buried, called dangerous. In 363 CE, the Council of Laodicea removed the Book of Enoch from approved scripture. Church authorities across the Roman world followed. The text was not debated. It was disappeared. For over 1,000 years, the Western world had no complete copy. Then, scholars reached Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had preserved the only intact canon, the only tradition that never dropped it. 1 book, 1 surviving lineage. That number is not symbolic. It is a fact of manuscript history. What that book contains is not allegory, and it is not mythology. It is a precise architectural description of the intermediate state of the dead. 4 sealed chambers beneath a mountain, each assigned to a different category of soul, and the criteria for entry determined entirely by what was done with the body. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text actually records, what that recording reveals about the soul's fate between death and judgment, and why the body's treatment at death is not incidental, but structurally determinative. If forbidden biblical history is the territory you want to keep exploring, subscribe now. Every week, we surface what was removed. The passage comes from the 22nd chapter of 1 Enoch, verses 1 through 3. The manuscript tradition behind it runs through the Ge'ez language codices held by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the oldest of which date to the 14th and 15th centuries, and preserve a text whose underlying Aramaic fragments were recovered at Qumran, fragments designated 4Q206, now housed in the Israel Antiquities Authority in Jerusalem. The standard English translation remains Dr. Michael Knibb's 1978 Oxford edition, and it is precise enough to build a floor plan from. The Ge'ez term at the center of this passage is makbar. It is not the common word for grave. A grave is a pit dug for deposit. Makbar carries the sense of a sealed holding vault, a structured enclosure designed not for disposal, but for containment and waiting. The distinction is not minor. A grave ends the story. A makbar pauses it. Raphael, the angel assigned as Enoch's guide, names the chambers explicitly. There are 4. The first holds the spirits of the righteous, those who died in right standing, whose bodies received proper burial rites. They wait in light. The second holds the spirits of sinners who were never brought to judgment during their lives. They wait in darkness, but they wait. The third chamber is the one that breaks the pattern. It holds the spirits of those who were slain. Not sinners in the conventional sense. Slain. Murdered. Their blood was shed, and their bodies, in many cases, were left exposed, unburied, unattended. They occupy a separate enclosure entirely. The fourth chamber holds the hardened, those who aligned themselves with wickedness and whose deaths came without any turn toward justice. They do not wait in the same darkness as the second group. The text marks them differently. The geometry of these chambers is not vague. The text describes walls that are smooth. It describes depth. It describes width. Raphael does not wave his hand at a general underworld. He walks Enoch through a structure with distinct compartments, each sealed, each assigned. This is not the Greek Hades as a shadowy, undifferentiated plane. This is a sorted system with criteria, and those criteria are checkable against the text. Here is where the impossible knowledge beat lands. This text was composed at its earliest recoverable layer, sometime in the 3rd or 2nd century before the Common Era. The writer had no access to the New Testament. He had no access to later Jewish rabbinic development on the intermediate state. Yet the sorting logic he records, righteous separated from wicked, the slain in their own category, the unburied occupying a distinct chamber from the buried, maps precisely onto the framework that appears centuries later in Luke's account of Lazarus and the rich man, where a great gulf is fixed between the two sides of Sheol, and neither can cross. He had no way to know the later text would confirm this architecture, yet the architecture matches. The century bridge runs in both directions here. Modern forensic anthropology has established that ancient cultures developed burial rites not merely for hygiene or sentiment, but as a structured response to what they believed about the soul's transit. Exposure of the body, leaving it unburied, was considered in dozens of ancient legal codes, including the Code of Hammurabi and Hittite treaty law, to be the gravest possible post-mortem punishment. The Mesopotamians called it the death after death. The text of 1 Enoch is not borrowing that anxiety. It is explaining it. It is providing the mechanism. The unburied soul does not enter the same chamber as the buried soul. The body's fate at death is not incidental. It is the sorting criterion. And the text does not stop at geography. There is a manuscript held in the British Library, catalogued under Oriental 499, a Ge'ez parchment copied in the 15th century from far older source material. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation remains the standard English rendering, worked directly from this codex. And inside it, in the passage that runs from verse 5 through verse 7 of the 22nd section, Enoch records something that should not have been possible to record. The spirits of the slain are crying out. Not whispering, not resting, crying out. The Ge'ez word used here is dem. It means blood. But in this context, dem is not a substance. It is a voice. It is active testimony. The ancient scribes who copied this text understood dem as something that continues to speak after the body stops. The blood of the slain becomes a legal witness. It does not decay. It does not go silent. It stands as perpetual evidence before a court that never adjourns. This is not metaphor. The text is building a forensic framework. The archetype the text reaches for is Abel. Abel's blood, poured into the ground, became the first recorded instance of dem as testimony. The ground received it, and then the ground spoke. That is the mechanism. Unburied blood, blood scattered without proper rite, without sealed interment, does not enter the transit system of Sheol on a normal schedule. It lingers. It accumulates. It cries from inside the earth itself. Enoch had no way to know what we know now. Yet here is what the science has confirmed. In 2018, the journal Nature published findings from a forensic genomics team at the University of Copenhagen. They demonstrated that human DNA extracted from bone fragments retains full identity markers after more than 5,000 years of burial. 5,000 years. The skeleton does not dissolve into anonymity. The bones hold the record. Every scattered fragment of a human body carries, encoded in its molecular structure, a complete and readable signature. The identity does not leave with the soul. The physical remains keep testifying. Long after death, long after the flesh is gone, the ancient scribes called it dem. The Copenhagen team calls it genomic persistence. Same phenomenon, different century. And this is where the framework becomes precise in a way that should stop you completely. The text in Oriental 499 does not say the spirits cry out from a general place. It specifies the slain who are not properly received by the earth, whose blood was scattered, whose bodies were left. They occupy a distinct hollow within Sheol. They are separated from the others. Their testimony is still active. Their cry is still registered. The ground they bled into became a courtroom floor. No ancient author inventing a comfort narrative writes this. A comfort narrative says the slain are at rest. This text says they are still speaking. It says the earth itself holds their testimony, and that testimony has legal standing in a judgment framework that is not yet concluded. The ground is a courtroom, and it never closes. Which means the question of what happens to the body, how it is treated, where it is placed, whether it is sealed or scattered, is not a cultural preference. It is evidentiary procedure. And the text has an entire legal code built around it. Return to Oriental 499. Move forward through the same section into verses 12 and 13. Dr. Nibb's translation holds here with particular weight. The Ge'ez original uses the word keber. Keber means burial. But in this passage, keber is not simply the act of placing a body in the ground. It is a legal event. It is the act that seals the body's testimony and initiates the soul's proper transit. Nibb notes in his 1978 commentary that keber carries a jurisprudential resonance in the Ethiopic tradition that the English word burial entirely fails to capture. The burial is not the end of the story. It is the filing of a record. The passage states plainly, "Sinners who are buried in the earth await a chamber of pain." The burial does not save them from judgment, but it completes the sequence. The body is sealed. The soul is released. The transit begins. Without keber, that sequence breaks. Here is what the text describes, and here is where the impossible knowledge beat arrives again. The soul, according to this passage, does not depart the body instantly. It hovers. It remains in proximity to the physical remains during an intermediate period before entering Sheol's transit system. The ancient Ge'ez word used for this hovering is a form of the verb that implies waiting in attendance, as a witness waits in a court anteroom. The soul is present at the sealing. The burial is the act that formally releases it to proceed. This is not a concept that Second Temple Judaism invented. Enoch is recording it as established mechanism. And here is where the modern match lands. In 2014, the journal Resuscitation published a study from the University of Southampton, led by Dr. Sam Parnia. The AWARE study, Awareness During Resuscitation, documented verified out-of-body observations in cardiac arrest patients. Patients who were clinically dead reported accurate visual details from positions outside and above their own bodies. Details that were later confirmed by medical staff. The soul, or whatever term you choose, was observing the body from an external vantage point during the interval between clinical death and biological cessation. The ancient scribes described a hovering witness. Dr. Parnia's team documented hovering witnesses. Same interval, different century. Now the text goes further. It states that desecration of the body, the deliberate scattering or destruction of physical remains, disrupts the ordained release sequence. Keber is not just tradition. It is the mechanism of proper transit. When the body is denied burial, the soul's release is disrupted. The testimony is scattered without being sealed. The courtroom record is incomplete. This is why the unburied occupy a distinct chamber. This is why their cry in the previous passage has not ceased. The sequence was broken before it could complete. And this is where the ancient record becomes deeply personal. The passage that closes the first major doctrinal arc of 1st Enoch sits in a section held across multiple manuscript traditions. The Ethiopic Codex Qumran 9, housed at the monastery of Qumran Gabriel on Lake Tana in Ethiopia, preserves this material in its oldest continuous form. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, whose 1983 translation for the Old Testament pseudepigrapha volume, edited by James Charlesworth, is the scholarly benchmark, renders the key verses with careful precision. The earth will give back what it has received. That is the claim. Direct. Unambiguous. The body deposited in the earth at death is not discarded. It is held. it is kept, and at a specific future moment, it is returned. The Ge'ez word for this event is tinsei. It means rising, but not rising in the abstract, spiritual, metaphorical sense that modern theology often defaults to. Tinsei implies the same object transformed, the same body, not a replacement, not a symbolic representation. The body that went into the ground is the body that comes out, altered in form, elevated in nature, but continuous in identity with what was buried. This is the impossible knowledge beat. Enoch had no electron microscope. He had no knowledge of cellular biology. Yet the claim encoded in tinsei, that the body retains its identity across death and transformation, maps precisely onto what modern science has confirmed about biological material. In 2012, researchers at the European Bioinformatics Institute published findings demonstrating that DNA stored in bone mineral can survive for over 1 million years under the right conditions. 1 million years. The physical substrate of human identity does not simply dissolve, it persists, it waits. The molecular record of who a person was is still present in the earth, intact, readable, centuries and millennia after burial. The ancient scribes encoded tinsei, the same body transformed. The EBI team confirmed that the body's identity record survives in the ground indefinitely. Same reality, different century. But the text draws a sharp line here, and it is a line the modern reader needs to sit with. Not everyone rises under tinsei. The passage states that hardened sinners do not emerge. Their chamber in Sheol is permanent. The earth does not return what they deposited, because the sequence of proper burial, proper transit, and proper waiting was either broken, or their record in the courtroom contains no grounds for release. The chamber holds them. The earth holds their remains, but the return does not come. The righteous are clothed again. That is the specific language. Clothed. The physical form is restored as a garment, a transformed, glorified garment, but a garment continuous with the original. The body is not a temporary container that the soul discards. The body is the vessel of final vindication. The judgment requires the full person, and the full person requires the body. This is not a minor theological footnote. It is the entire architecture of why the body matters after death, why the ground matters, why burial is law and not custom. The body is evidence. The body is testimony. The body is the record. And at tinsei, the record is read aloud. But here is what makes this stranger than any modern theology allows. The Ge'ez manuscripts remain in Aksum, physically, today. 1 Enoch chapter 22 is publicly readable in R. H. Charles's 1912 translation. No institution required, no restricted archive. The 4 chambers are still mapped, still named, still waiting for anyone willing to read what is written. 1,600 years of bans, councils, and deliberate omission failed to erase the testimony. The mechanism Enoch describes, body as record, burial as law, resurrection as the reading of that record, is still running, right now, underneath every unmarked grave. Does Enoch's burial law change how you think about death? Leave that below. The hidden record surfaces here every week. Subscribe if that matters to you.